Welcome to the first edition of the Athletes Edge Q&A. My name is Patrick Ford. I am a physical therapist in Waukee, Iowa with Kinetic Edge Physical Therapy. I've been here for 2 years and really just wanted to start this type of conversation so that you guys can get better access to sports and orthopedic related rehab and how to get better, as well as common topics that people have a lot of questions about. We can give a professional point of view into how to navigate these different situations. And today we are going to talk about gait retraining for distance runners. And I have two of my colleagues on with me today, one being James and the other being Todd. So I'll turn it over to them. James, go ahead and introduce yourself here.
Yeah, thank you. This is really a cool opportunity and looking forward to what this series might look like and how it develops. So Patrick, thanks for coming up with a really brilliant idea. And I think Todd and I were a little on the spot initially because we thought we were literally just going to have a conversation with you, and little did we know that here we are being recorded. So I think this is awesome. So my name is James Laughlin. I'm a physical therapist assistant. I work in the Des Moines location, and just kind of really enjoy the concept of movement, period. But being a runner specifically, looking at people's gait, trying to help them to continue doing the activity, the sport that they love, and helping them feel confident in doing that. My own experience is more of a trail runner. I am a distance runner. I typically do more of the ultra distance, so the 50 Ks up to 50 miles. The intent this year was to get a little bit further, but COVID-19 had different plans for this recreation, so we'll save those plans for next year and maybe be just a little bit fitter, having an extra year off in between.
Yeah, thanks, James. Todd, what about you?
Yeah, good afternoon, Patrick and James. Glad to be hanging out with you guys here for a little chat. Yeah, I'm a physical therapist in Des Moines, downtown Des Moines for Kinetic Edge. I've been with our company for quite a while. I've been a PT for 20 plus years and actually been a runner for longer than that. Started running probably about 30 years ago and haven't really been able to quit yet for some reason. So my background is in track and cross country, and then as a triathlete in my early adult years, and then more the last several years more as just love doing charity relays, running with friends, just doing other local road races, and really enjoy working with runners. We've been working with runners in our clinic for the last 15 years or more, and really enjoy helping anyone from a high school athlete to an adult with their running issues. So glad to be a part of the talk today.
Todd, do you mind telling us a little bit about the event that you are participating in coming up very soon?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, next Friday, so just a week from now, my son and I are on a team with a charity called Break the Cycle 200. It's about a 10-year-old charity event using long distance cycling and running to help raise awareness and funds for human trafficking, both locally and in Nepal, so local and international. But the group really is focused on helping to get the word out that human trafficking is happening right here in Iowa. It's a tragedy, it's a big deal, and we're trying to help break the cycle with that of helping victims who are stuck in that, as well as doing things to crack down on those that are a part of it. And yeah, fundraising for that. It's been going well. Training's going pretty well. And we're running a 200-mile team relay next Friday in West Des Moines. Because of COVID, we're not traveling to Okoboji this year. We're going to keep it local. But we got a group of about 12 people that are all pledging to run a certain amount of miles to, as a team, reach our 200-mile goal from sunrise to sunset next Friday.
Thanks, Todd. That's great. I think that's a great cause to be fighting for, and it's right on topic with what we're going to talk about today, which is gait retraining for distance runners, right? And I think I wanted to start off in a place that a lot of people are kind of exploring now, which is finding the perfect running technique, right? It used to be that runners didn't really care too much about technique, just the training, the miles, the components of their actual program, but now we're looking more at the way that they're running and trying to play with that a little bit. So tell me, in your guys' opinion, is there a perfect running technique that everybody needs to implement?
I can kind of jump in on that first. No, I don't think there is. I think that you kind of run what you run. Arnold Palmer had a line that says, swing your swing. And in the golf parlance, that just meant that not everybody needs to look the same. And you just understand your anatomy, you understand your stride and what your expectations are. And no, I think you run what you run. If you look at most people out there, if you look at 100 people, I think you're going to see 100 different techniques when somebody's running. And that doesn't necessarily indicate that that person's going to get hurt. I think it's, if somebody is hurt, then we might have to address some underlying cause, and maybe that has something to do with altering their gait in some way to make the running more efficient for them, to decrease the likelihood of them getting hurt, or to decrease their hurt so they can continue with the activity they want to do. But no, I'm not a strong believer that there's an optimal gait out there for one person.
Yeah, I agree with what James is talking about. It's there's so much variety out there. We have maybe an ideal or a kind of a pattern that we're trying to transition people towards, especially if they are injured and they're dealing with some issues where they're having pain while they're running. You know, we're going to make some adjustments, some modifications to see if we can improve on that. But even when they improve and they get better and they're healthy, that form may slightly shift back to where they were before, and that may or may not be a bad thing. We hope that some of the tips and tricks we give them are going to help them long term as well. And that's really kind of a fun part of what we do. We're not just trying to help somebody get rid of their injury, but we're trying to help them avoid that in the future. And some of those gait retraining cues and tips can really help you then maybe break a pattern of a repetitive injury you've had year after year or something. So I think that's where kind of the fun comes in, that it might be a lifelong change for somebody, or maybe kind of a short-term tweak to help them get through an issue.
Yeah, I think those are great points, and you guys bring up some really important things that I think we should touch on too. Is if you're not injured, the way that you run, your body might have adapted to the style that you're running in, right? So if you take somebody who's uninjured and you decide to change their gait, their body might not be ready for that, and it might actually end up causing problems for them. And going on the opposite side of that, somebody who is running, essentially what the mechanics, from what I'm gathering that you're saying, is that we're changing the stressors that they're experiencing so that they can better adapt and get back to running pain-free, and then maybe their body ends up going toward that previous style that they were more efficient with in the long run. Is that pretty accurate about what you guys are saying?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, Patrick. It's definitely not a cookie cutter approach. It's not a one size fits all. I mean, we evaluate a lot of runners, and we're always kind of surprised at what we see. There's always something a little bit different, or something maybe we hadn't really seen a big trend with. And sometimes those small changes can go a long ways, because if you make big changes, yeah, I think you're right. What you said on the beginning is you're going to have kind of a muscular fatigue issue. You're going to have a cardiovascular fatigue issue. You know, somebody's shifting, an example, from a kind of a heel striker to they read something, they need to run on their toes. Well, you can add a whole new group of injuries if you drastically change your gait, as opposed to maybe some fine tuning or some tweaking that we want to do just to make it a little bit better. If you feel like you're trying to make it totally better or different, that's probably where you're going to end up with some more problems.
Yeah, I can't agree any more than that. And it really comes down to load tolerance. And so if you have a certain stride that you've run with, but you've now moved on to maybe, let's say, the pose method, which is more of a forefoot running technique, and you maintain that same volume of activity, but now you, as Todd mentioned, you're starting to recruit 60% of a different muscle, it's not going to be able to handle that load. And the reality of it is that person's going to probably end up with an injury because the tissue wasn't prepared for that. So Yeah, I mean, I would always encourage people that are thinking about making a change in their gait is to really think about why they're trying to make the change. What do they think they're missing? You know, it's like trying to purchase a shoe because you think the shoe's going to make you faster. It's the motor that makes you faster, and you're the motor. So it's your training that does that. The shoe isn't the magic element, and I don't think the gait technique necessarily is either, because that change in gait may be less efficient and actually increasing your likelihood of injury, in addition to the fact of changing the stresses and load on that body as well.
I think those are all great points. And I think stemming off of that, if there's not a perfect gait pattern for everybody to adopt, then are there certain things, certain components of gait that might put them more at risk for injuries? Is there anything that you guys found clinically or in the research that might put somebody more at risk for injury based on the way that they're running?
I can start with one right off the top. Patellofemoral pain is strongly associated with an overstride. So that individual who's landing is maybe on the forefoot, maybe on the midfoot, or even the heel, but when it's landing further out in front of their body, so it's not directly underneath their center of mass, those individuals have an increase in braking force when they run, which increases what's called a bone stress and can lead to something more like patellofemoral disorder.
Yeah, one thing that maybe something that's not as common, but I do see is kind of the lower leg rotation. So if you're looking at a runner from behind, if we have them on the treadmill and we see them toe off and their toe and lower leg twists to the outside, and then as they come back around, they twist that lower leg to the inside. So this kind of more rotary look to the lower leg, I definitely have seen that as a risk factor or a common issue with those that are dealing with either shin splint type issues. There's a lot of extra motion going around the lower leg, or even kind of feeding into the knee as well. But often that's a shin splint or lower leg overuse where you're trying to make up for some more proximal weaknesses, more at the hip, by overusing some of the lower leg muscles to help with that. And then some of those deviations can lead to those overuses. So that's kind of a pattern that if I see it, which I don't see it a lot, but if we see it, sometimes it can be pretty pronounced and really needs to be addressed, I feel, to help that person minimize that extra torque that's going on around their lower leg.
A great example of that, Todd, is if you guys go back to the Olympic qualifiers that we all saw, I'm losing track of time, earlier this year, and the gal that came in second place that qualified for the Olympics, if you watched her run, she has a very pronounced whip. So if you want a good example of it, there's about 2 hours worth of it out there on YouTube somewhere, I'm sure, for you to find.
So good point, James. Even somebody who is at that Olympic level has deviations, and I've seen that before too. And some different runners that I've watched that are at that caliber, that even at those high level athletes, you feel like, oh, I need to change that. But do you need to? Do you really need to?
Right.
And that's a good discussion. I think there's probably lots of opinions about that.
Right.
And I feel like I would be remiss to not mention this, although it's outside the scope of this discussion, how important their actual training regimen and their strength and conditioning program, or lack of, might be also contributing to their pain, symptoms, injury, right? Too quickly going into a program, adding too much mileage too soon, adding too much intensity, not incorporating strength training. Those all help to make people more resilient. And I found personally that when I start incorporating those things, people start getting better and they get more resilient to injury. And that's probably one of the number one factors that I'm looking into as well is, okay, let's watch your gait to see if we could alter the stressors, but in the long term, how do we make sure that your program matches with your goals of preventing or reducing your risk of injury, improving running efficiency, your time in the 800 or the 3 mile or the 10K, whatever it is your goal is. So I think it's important for us to at least mention that those things are a large part of the equation when it comes to preventing injury. But going off of what you guys said, that those are two key things that you're looking at what do you think about heel striking versus forefoot striking, or pronation, or crossover gait? What do you think about those types of gait patterns and how they correlate or don't correlate to injury?
Yeah, I think for me, I feel like I've been working with gait retraining, even before the Born to Run book came out. So I've for a long time have been really coaching people on a flatter landing below. So the idea is we're not necessarily trying to get rid of a heel strike. We're not trying to turn everybody into a toe runner, but we're also not saying that heel striking is a disease or a problem. Just trying to create more efficiency with the landing. We're a quicker stride, more of a quicker turnover, getting that foot more below your center of mass. James mentioned the braking forces earlier. We're really trying to help people minimize putting the brakes on while you're running. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, and it's also can be hard on your body. So for me, I kind of would simplify it to kind of a flatter landing below, which means either below your knee or below your center of mass, your body. And as we analyze runners, we really look at that landing phase, looking at where does that heel land, where's that initial contact, or as your foot is fully engaged with the ground, where is that at in relationship to your body, and using various methods to help people improve on that, which can be cadence or cues, drills. It just depends on the person to help them improve on some of those efficiencies.
Yeah, so to kind of piggyback off that, absolutely. I don't think any research has really strongly correlated foot strike with injury. It really is the overstride, and overstride isn't a foot strike. It is where the foot strikes relative to the center of mass. And so that's what we're always looking at. Are you landing underneath yourself and perpetually pushing yourself forward? Or is your foot acting as a brake and slowing you down? And then you have to increase your effort to not only overcome that, but to propel yourself into the next step. That's where the efficiency model kind of comes from. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think that brought up another idea of this idea of cadence. And is there an ideal running technique? Well, I think there's probably an ideal running technique for each individual. So there's as many techniques as there are individuals, and it's whatever allows you to land the most efficiently, to propel yourself forward, to get the most out of the activity that you're trying to do, while also reducing the likelihood that you're going to injure yourself. So cadence does play, I think, a strong role in that we can look at someone's cadence to help determine or to help maybe make some of the corrections in their running gait to help them find the best number for them maybe.
That kind of goes into my next question about gait retraining and your initial strategies when you're working with somebody. That, like, what's the first thing I go to when I teach somebody to run a different way or with different mechanics or what have you? When you go toward cadence, do you see changes across the spectrum of biomechanical movements along the kinetics as they're running? What's your go-tos? What do you guys do initially when you're trying to retrain somebody's gait?
Yeah, I think for me, what I personally am looking at is I start with the posture. I want to look at their head position or shoulder position. How are they carrying their elbows? How are they using their arms to help counterbalance what their lower body is doing? So I kind of step back and want to look at it at a much larger perspective first, and making those simple changes there. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times what you're going to find is as you're modifying the cadence, those other things are going to start adjusting in order to maintain the coordination of the movement. And you know when you've gone too far, because you'll see that discoordination again. It'll start to revert back to where they were at previously. So there's a fine line in there, and there's really a range. And there's no I should clarify, there's no one perfect number for some person, because we all run in a variety of terrains. I can't expect somebody to run downhill, uphill, around a corner, on uneven surfaces, on a track, all at 178 steps per minute, let's say. That's just not going to be realistic. What we're trying to do is help them through the cadence concept, get a feel for what their natural gait should or could be, and then try to maintain that through all of the activity that they do, regardless of the surface that they're running on. So it's not a number thing per se. It's more of a range, and it's more of what are you getting from that number? You're getting a feel, you're getting a posture, you're getting a stride length, you're getting a lot of things, but we can simplify it by giving it to them in a number range so they don't have to overthink it. Because I think that's probably where a lot of people have difficulty, is if we give them too many things to work on, it's hard to make that adjustment. And if we give them intrinsic things to work on, like, well, turn your knee out or do this or do that, how do you do that? Like, I don't know how to do that, and this is what I've been trained to do. And it's more global. Like, if somebody's got a narrow stride, try not to kick yourself. That's a pretty simple concept. Try not to kick yourself. And guess what happens? We naturally widen our gait to what is appropriate for us. So yeah, I think you have to look at it all. And I think the number just kind of ties them all back in together, I guess, to kind of answer your question.
I can tell James and I have worked together for a while. We talk the same talk pretty clearly. So yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot else to add to that, other than I probably tend to start with cadence. And if that's where I want it to be, but the person still is showing some form flaws or deviations, then we kind of dig into the detail of how they're landing, or what position their posture is in stance phase, or how they're carrying their arms. Arm carry is a big one, because if you aren't moving your arms efficiently, it's going to be hard to move your legs efficiently. So we do talk a lot about arm position and trunk lean and those kinds of things. Again, going back to what James mentioned with posture. But yeah, letting people know that it's not about the number, it's about what an improved efficient cadence helps your body do, so that feeling can be something that you take with you for years to come. I know personally, if I'm not at a 168 or higher with my running, I know I'm just throwing out some junk miles, and I just don't feel right. If I can get my legs to turn over at that rate, it really helps me feel better and even just recover better after a run, because I'm not just reaching with my legs and putting extra force through. So that's just more my personal example. But really the goal is not a number. It's more of about the feel that you get when you're at a more optimal rate for yourself.
Yeah, that's great. I use a similar strategy, especially attacking some cadence stuff first, because I feel like that's most often one of the components I notice people are a little bit lower on. Typically, they're below the range that I usually push people up to. I rarely find anybody over 180 unless they're a higher level, more efficient, or if they kind of just tend to, that's like the 1 out of 100 that you find that's at like a 188, and you're like, oh, actually maybe we like bring it back a little bit. But just out of personal experience, when I was more into my running, I had knee pain every time I ran for 10 years straight, every single time, and I had no idea what to do about it. I went to PT, but they didn't really work with me on that stuff. There really wasn't a ton as far as the research goes around back then, that pre-2010 area. I feel like 2010, after we started to see a lot more of this gait retraining stuff come out. But I learned more about gait retraining, and really the main change I made was bumping my cadence up, and I'm pretty comfortable at a 170, 172 steps per minute. And I noticed that I ended up being able to run pain-free. But the point I want to make is more toward the initial adaptation toward that cadence. I remember it took me a solid month to build up to that, and I felt way more tired during my runs when I was going through that phase of transition. How do you guys educate people on how to safely incorporate these changes into their gait, and let them know about maybe the consequences of what they're going to experience?
Yeah, I think on the front end, we really want it to be a regular thing. It's not like something you just try randomly throughout the week. Like, it really has to be a commitment if you're going to see the impact of it. So I just really encourage people like, hey, we want you to start incorporating this into all your runs. It's not thinking about it the whole run, because otherwise you're really going to not enjoy running anymore, because you're going to be fatigued and your mind's going to be on just your form. So really breaking it into drills, doing a 30-second, 1 minute focus on whatever we're having them work on, whether it's their cadence or their landing or their arm drive or something. But yeah, you bring up a good point, Patrick. Maybe we don't think about the negative implication of that in change in your form on the front end. But I think that as people come back and we talk about it, some of those questions come up like, wow, I is feeling better, but I'm more fatigued, or I'm not running as fast, or I'm running faster, and it's trying to figure out that balance between improving their form, but then not speeding up, which then could lead to other things. So it's hard to disassociate those things sometimes. But yeah, I think case by case, some people deal with some of those adaptations more than others. Some people are like, hey, I wish I would have ran this way for forever. Other people like, I don't know if I can handle this, because it's tough.
Yeah, and I think Todd brought up a couple of important things. One is when we're changing the cadence, we're not asking the person to run faster. We're asking them to increase the number of foot strikes at the same pace in a given time. And that's the hard part, I think, for people to get. So if you are that 160 runner and you're now at a 172, the goal wasn't to go from a 8-minute mile to a 7.5-minute mile. The goal was to stay at the 8-minute mile and still, but have an increased number of turnovers in that period of time. So I think that's really important for people to understand, is that what speed or level of exertion were you able to do that cadence at? Because that's what you need to reproduce when you're out on your own. And then I think to kind of like, what tools would one use, I think was the question that you had asked also, Patrick, is, you can do it to a metronome. You could run to a metronome, but you're following a signal. And when you do that, it's a little harder to internalize that and to make it a more permanent change. And so what I always encourage people to do is to keep it more in a range, and to have something that signals when they're above or when they're below that number, so they can make that own intrinsic change themselves to get back within that range. So if your watch would allow to set, like, if it's below 170, your number is 172-ish, and you set the thing at 168. So every time you drop below 168, your watch buzzes at you. Oh, I guess I've dropped my cadence. I need to pick back up. So that would be a great tool. And I think the same thing as Todd said. I don't think we run the entire time thinking about our cadence. I think cadence becomes a very purposeful initial part of your run to help you establish a pattern. But then you might spot check yourself throughout that run. But I'm not going to tell somebody to sit there for 30 minutes or 60 minutes and continuously count your steps. I think that's going to put an end to your running career.
Yeah, I think you guys are completely on point with what we need to do as providers in coaching these people, and where we need to look initially. And for people who are concerned about their running technique, that first, let's make sure that it's appropriate for you to change, and then go find somebody that can help make those changes. So thank you guys very much for jumping on this call. I want to definitely sit down with you again and talk some more about some running stuff, and we'll get some more conversations in. I think a strength training programming conversation will definitely be worthwhile. So thank you guys very much. This is the first episode, so I think we did a pretty good justice here, guys.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, this went pretty smoothly. This was good.
Yeah, thanks for hosting, Patrick. Appreciate it. Have a good day, sir.
Yeah, you guys too.